Marcus Caldwell sat in his wheelchair at the back of the courtroom, watching his ex-wife Rebecca and his former best friend Daniel embrace in celebration, unaware that the crippled man they had abandoned and humiliated was actually the secret multi-billionaire CEO who owned the very company where they both worked, where they had conducted their affair in his office, and where their entire future now rested in his hands. Rebecca had divorced Marcus 6 months after the car accident left him paralyzed, claiming she couldn't bear to be tied to a broken man anymore. But the truth was far more devastating. She had been cheating on him with Daniel for 3 years, and the 2 children Marcus had raised and loved weren't even his. They belonged to Daniel. A fact revealed in the DNA tests Marcus secretly ordered after finding suspicious text messages on Rebecca's phone. Marcus had played the role of the struggling disabled husband perfectly, never revealing that he was actually the phantom owner behind Apex Global Industries, the Fortune 500 company where Rebecca worked as a senior marketing director and Daniel served as vice president of operations, both climbing the corporate ladder while building their betrayal on Marcus's broken body and shattered trust. While Rebecca and Daniel celebrated their courthouse wedding, believing they had finally escaped the burden of Marcus's disability to start their new life together, they had no idea that the man in the wheelchair had just activated the first phase of 15 brutal levels of revenge that would systematically destroy everything they had built, strip away every asset they thought they owned, expose every secret they thought was buried, and leave them humiliated, ruined, and devastated in ways they could never imagine. But how did a crippled man become a secret billionaire? What devastating secrets would Marcus uncover about the children he raised? And what 15 levels of non-forgiving revenge would transform a broken husband into an unstoppable force of justice? Why had Rebecca really chosen to betray the man who once gave her everything? What role did Daniel play in the accident that crippled Marcus? And how would the final court battle expose the depth of their betrayal while crushing them forever under the weight of Marcus's perfectly orchestrated vengeance? Marcus Caldwell's life shattered on a rainy October night when the semi-truck ran the red light. But the real devastation came 3 months later when he discovered that his wife Rebecca had been planning to leave him even before the accident, that she had been sleeping with his best friend Daniel Morrison for years, and that the children he had fought to survive for weren't even his biological sons. The doctors said the spinal injury would keep him in a wheelchair indefinitely, maybe forever. But Marcus had pushed through agonizing physical therapy because he believed he had a family worth fighting for. A wife who had stood by his hospital bed crying and promising they would get through this together, and 2 boys who needed their father. What Marcus didn't know during those painful months of recovery was that Rebecca's tears weren't born from love, but from guilt and frustration, that she had been texting Daniel from the hospital waiting room, discussing how to handle the situation, and that she had already consulted 3 divorce attorneys about the best strategy to leave a disabled husband without looking like a monster. Marcus's parents had divorced when he was 8 after his mother discovered his father had embezzled money from his business partner to fund an affair with his secretary, a betrayal that left young Marcus living in a shelter for 6 months and shaped his obsessive need to build wealth and security, which explained why, at age 15, he had started his first online business coding websites, why at 19 he had dropped out of college to launch a tech startup, and why at 23 he had sold that company for $40 million before anyone in his personal life knew what he had accomplished. Rebecca's parents had stayed in a miserable marriage for 30 years, despite her father's serial infidelity, with at least 7 different women, including Rebecca's high school guidance counselor, which taught Rebecca that loyalty was for fools and that the only thing that mattered was securing the best financial position, a lesson reinforced when her mother died bitter and broke after finally divorcing her father, only to discover he had hidden assets in offshore accounts. Daniel's childhood had been marked by watching his father lose everything to his mother in a brutal divorce after she caught him cheating with his business partner, leaving Daniel's father homeless and suicidal, which planted in Daniel the seed that the only way to survive was to take what you wanted before someone took it from you. A philosophy that guided him through 3 previous relationships where he had impregnated 2 different women while engaged to others, convinced his college girlfriend to abort their child while secretly dating her roommate, and had systematically stolen credit for colleagues' work throughout his corporate career. The truth unraveled on a Tuesday afternoon when Marcus was going through old financial documents and found a credit card statement showing hotel charges on dates when Rebecca had claimed to be at corporate training seminars, luxury dinners for two at restaurants they had never visited together, and purchases at a men's store that weren't for him. Marcus's hands trembled as he cross-referenced the dates with his calendar and realized that many of these charges occurred during his business trips. Back when he could still walk, back when he had trusted his wife and best friend completely, and back when he had no idea that they were building a relationship on his money in his absence. He hired a private investigator named Sarah Chen, a former FBI agent whose own marriage had ended when she discovered her husband had fathered 3 children with different women during their 8-year marriage, making her uniquely motivated to expose infidelity with ruthless efficiency. Sarah's investigation revealed that Rebecca and Daniel's affair had started at a company Christmas party 4 years ago, that they had been sleeping together in Marcus's own house when he traveled, that Daniel had been Marcus's best man at their wedding while already planning to steal his wife, and most devastating of all, that the DNA tests Sarah arranged proved neither 7-year-old Jason nor 5-year-old Tyler shared Marcus's genetic material. Marcus remembered the joy he had felt when Jason was born, how he had cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands and cried at the miracle of fatherhood, how he had walked the floors at night soothing Tyler through colic, how he had coached Jason's Little League team and taught Tyler to ride a bike, and now every memory was poisoned by the knowledge that these children belonged to Daniel, that his best friend had violated his marriage bed and stolen years of his life. The investigation went deeper and revealed that Rebecca's first serious boyfriend in college had committed suicide after discovering she had aborted their child while sleeping with his roommate for drug money, that her second marriage before Marcus had ended when her husband caught her stealing from his family business to fund a gambling addiction, and that she had met Marcus at a charity gala where he was a donor and she was working as a cocktail waitress, immediately targeting him because his modest clothes and kind demeanor suggested someone wealthy trying to appear normal. Marcus had built his fortune in silence and secrecy, using shell companies and proxy investors to hide his identity because his mother's second husband had kidnapped him at age 12 and held him for ransom when word leaked about his father's insurance settlement from a workplace accident, an experience that taught Marcus that visible wealth made you a target and that true power came from controlling assets that no one knew you owned. After selling his first company, Marcus had invested in real estate, technology startups, and eventually acquired controlling interest in struggling corporations that he restructured and revitalized, including Apex Global Industries, which he had purchased through a web of offshore holdings 6 years ago and transformed from a failing manufacturing company into a Fortune 500 powerhouse. Rebecca had no idea that her husband owned the company where she worked, that every promotion she thought she had earned through merit was actually approved by Marcus watching from the shadows, and that Daniel's rapid rise to vice president had been orchestrated by Marcus because he valued loyalty and wanted to reward his best friend's apparent dedication. The irony twisted like a knife in Marcus's chest as he reviewed the security footage Sarah had obtained, watching Rebecca and Daniel having sex on the executive desk that Marcus had purchased, in the office that existed because of Marcus's capital and vision, celebrating promotions that Marcus had greenlit while he believed his family was intact and his friend was trustworthy. Daniel's corporate file revealed a pattern of manipulating female colleagues for advancement, including sleeping with 3 different supervisors to secure promotions, stealing proprietary information from previous employers, and a sealed legal settlement involving sexual harassment that Marcus's company had unknowingly inherited when Daniel transferred from a merged subsidiary. Rebecca's employment record showed expense report fraud, manipulation of sales figures to inflate her performance bonuses, and an ongoing scheme where she had been routing company funds through fake vendor accounts, embezzling roughly $200,000 over 3 years, while Marcus's accounting team missed the discrepancies in the massive corporate budget. 6 months after the accident, Rebecca filed for divorce with papers that portrayed Marcus as emotionally abusive and financially controlling, claiming she deserved 70% of their marital assets because she had sacrificed her career to care for a disabled husband. a statement so absurd that Marcus would have laughed if his heart wasn't breaking. The divorce papers were delivered by a process server who found Marcus in physical therapy, struggling through painful exercises to regain minimal leg function, pushing himself because he thought his sons needed a father who could eventually walk again, not knowing those boys shared none of his DNA. Rebecca had timed everything perfectly, filing when Marcus appeared weakest, when public sympathy would favor the brave woman, leaving a burden, and when she had already moved Daniel into a luxury apartment she believed she was renting with her own money, not realizing the building was owned by one of Marcus's subsidiary companies. The divorce attorney Rebecca hired was Nathan Pierce, a man whose own wife had left him for his law partner after 26 years of marriage, taking their 3 children and his pension, making him sympathetic to women leaving marriages, and blind to the possibility that his new client might be the villain in this story. Daniel proposed to Rebecca 3 weeks after she filed for divorce, giving her a ring purchased with a bonus he had received for a project that Marcus's capital had funded, taking her to a restaurant that Marcus's investment group owned, and promising her a future built on the foundation of Marcus's pain. Rebecca said yes while posting engagement photos on social media that showed her beaming with happiness, her caption reading, "Sometimes God closes one door to open a better one." The comments filled with friends congratulating her bravery and supporting her difficult decision. No one knowing the truth of her betrayal, her theft, or her lies. Rebecca Hartwell had learned everything about survival from watching her mother Paula endure 23 years of marriage to a man who had fathered at least 4 children with other women, who had stolen from his own parents to fund gambling debts, and who had eventually abandoned the family when Rebecca was 16, leaving them with $70,000 in debt and a foreclosure notice. Paula's parents had also divorced after Rebecca's grandfather had conducted a 10-year affair with his brother's wife, producing 2 children who grew up believing they were cousins, a family secret that exploded at a reunion and led to her grandmother's nervous breakdown and eventual suicide when Rebecca was 9. These intergenerational patterns of betrayal had wired Rebecca's brain to view marriage as a transaction, love as a weakness, and loyalty as something only stupid people practiced while smart people positioned themselves for maximum advantage. Her first serious relationship at 19 had been with Marcus Chen, a pre-med student whose parents had survived a bitter custody battle where his mother had falsely accused his father of abuse to gain sole custody, only for the truth to emerge years later, destroying their family's credibility and leaving Marcus Chen unable to trust women or commit to relationships. Rebecca had gotten pregnant by Marcus Chen's roommate while dating him, convinced Marcus Chen the child was his, then had a miscarriage that she privately celebrated because it freed her from that connection. A pattern she would repeat twice more in her 20s with different men, using pregnancy scares to manipulate emotions and extract financial support before quietly losing babies that may or may not have existed. Daniel Morrison's path to betrayal had been paved by watching his father Gregory lose his construction business, his savings, and eventually his will to live after Daniel's mother had an affair with Gregory's business partner, then divorced Gregory and married the partner, taking Daniel and his sister to live in the house that Gregory had built with his own hands. Gregory's parents had divorced when he was young after his father discovered his mother had been running a prostitution ring from their home, using the money to fund her sister's drug habit, a scandal that sent Gregory's father to prison for assault when he attacked his wife's pimp, leaving Gregory to be raised by an aunt who had her own history of 4 marriages and 6 children by different fathers. Daniel had internalized the lesson that nice men finish last, that loyalty was punished, and that the only way to win was to take what you wanted before someone took it from you, which explained why he had sabotaged his college roommate's job interviews to secure a position himself, why he had slept with his previous boss's wife to gather blackmail material for a promotion, and why he had stolen trade secrets from 3 different employers before joining Apex Global Industries. Daniel's first wife had left him after discovering he had impregnated her sister during their honeymoon, a betrayal that cost him his first marriage, but taught him to be more careful about leaving evidence, not to stop betraying people, but to hide it better. His second serious relationship had ended when the woman discovered he had been embezzling from their joint business account to fund a separate life with another woman in a different city, complete with an apartment and promises of marriage. His ability to compartmentalize his duplicity so complete that he felt no guilt, only annoyance at being caught. Rebecca and Daniel's affair had started innocently enough by their corrupted standards, with flirtatious texts after a corporate happy hour where they had bonded over complaints about their lives. Rebecca lamenting that Marcus was too nice and boring, Daniel agreeing that his girlfriend was clingy and demanding, neither of them recognizing the cruel irony that they were complaining about people who loved them to someone equally untrustworthy. Their first kiss happened in a supply closet during a conference in Miami. Their first sexual encounter in a hotel room that Marcus had paid for through the company's travel budget, believing he was investing in his wife's professional development, not funding her affair. The relationship escalated quickly because both Rebecca and Daniel were skilled at compartmentalizing their betrayals, at looking Marcus in the eye over dinner and lying with practiced ease, at attending family gatherings where Daniel played with the boys he had secretly fathered while pretending to be the loyal best friend. Daniel's mother had done the same thing with his father, attending family barbecues with her lover, disguised as her husband's business partner, teaching Daniel that betrayal was sustainable as long as you maintained the performance, that guilt was weakness, and that the people who trusted you were simply easier to exploit. Rebecca's aunt had conducted a 5-year affair with her husband's brother, eventually divorcing her husband to marry the brother, then divorcing that brother to marry his best friend, a pattern of serial betrayal that Rebecca had witnessed as normalized behavior, reinforcing her belief that trading up was not only acceptable, but smart strategy. The pregnancy with Jason had been planned, but not with Marcus. Rebecca had intentionally stopped taking birth control and timed intercourse with Daniel to coincide with her fertile window, then slept with Marcus during the same period to establish plausible deniability, a strategy she had learned from her cousin who had successfully passed off 3 children to the wrong fathers across 2 marriages. When Marcus celebrated becoming a father, holding Jason in the hospital with tears of joy streaming down his face, Rebecca felt nothing but satisfaction at having secured her position, knowing that a child would make divorce more complicated and expensive for Marcus if she ever needed to leave. Daniel had been thrilled to have a biological son, but understood the need for secrecy, already planning how Jason's existence could be leveraged later, perhaps for a paternity suit if Rebecca's marriage to Marcus ever became more valuable to leave than to stay in. The same pattern repeated with Tyler, another calculated pregnancy designed to bind Marcus further to a family that wasn't his, another child whose birth certificate listed the wrong father, another layer of deception that Rebecca and Daniel built while accepting Marcus's love, his financial support, and his trust. Rebecca's grandmother had done something similar in the 1960s, having 3 children by her husband's business partner while maintaining her marriage, only confessing the truth on her deathbed, destroying her children's sense of identity and inheritance rights in one final act of selfish cruelty that rippled through generations. The car accident that crippled Marcus should have been a moment of genuine crisis and reflection for Rebecca, but instead it became an opportunity to finally escape a marriage she had never truly valued, to claim victimhood while abandoning the man who had given her everything, and to start fresh with Daniel without the inconvenience of Marcus's presence. Rebecca's father had abandoned her mother in similar circumstances when her mother developed breast cancer, leaving because he couldn't handle sick people, teaching Rebecca that when people became burdens, you left, regardless of vows or history or decency. In the hospital, Rebecca had practiced her concerned wife performance while texting Daniel about divorce strategies, researching disability laws to understand Marcus's financial obligations, and calculating how much of his apparent assets she could claim, never knowing that Marcus's visible wealth was a tiny fraction of his actual fortune. Daniel had visited Marcus in the hospital, bearing gifts and words of encouragement, while secretly planning to move into Marcus's house, raise Marcus's supposed children, and take over Marcus's role in every way. His father's destruction at the hands of a betraying wife, and her lover having taught Daniel to be the lover rather than the victim, to take rather than be taken from. The engagement happened quickly after the divorce filing because both Rebecca and Daniel were eager to legitimize their relationship, to stop sneaking around, and to present themselves as a couple who had found love after hardship rather than cheaters who had destroyed a good man's life. Their capacity for self-delusion matched only by their talent for manipulation. The courthouse wedding was deliberately modest because Rebecca wanted to appear sympathetic, not celebratory, conscious that she was marrying her ex-husband's best friend mere months after leaving a disabled man, but unable to resist the pull of finally making public what had been hidden for years. Daniel's best man was his brother, who had his own history of stealing his best friend's fiancée and eventually marrying her after sabotaging their relationship with lies and forged evidence, making him the perfect witness to another betrayal disguised as love. Rebecca's maid of honor was her sister Jennifer, who had slept with Rebecca's first serious boyfriend in high school and had conducted a 2-year affair with Rebecca's second husband during their marriage. Family loyalty, meaning nothing in a clan where every woman had learned that men were resources to be exploited and relationships were games to be won. The ceremony was quick and simple, the judge bored and mechanical, neither Rebecca nor Daniel noticing the man in the wheelchair at the back of the courtroom, assuming he was there for a different case, never imagining that Marcus had come to witness their union before destroying it, to see their happiness before crushing it, to remember their smiles before turning them into screams. Marcus Caldwell's revenge began with surgical precision the Monday morning after Rebecca and Daniel's courthouse wedding, when every system they had relied upon started to collapse in ways that seemed unfortunate but not yet connected. Random bad luck that would soon reveal itself as orchestrated destruction. Daniel arrived at Apex Global Industries to discover his security access had been revoked due to what IT called a system error, forcing him to wait in the lobby for 45 minutes while colleagues streamed past, some smirking at the vice president unable to enter his own building. Daniel's frustration growing with each passing minute, but not yet understanding that this humiliation was intentional, designed, and just beginning. Rebecca discovered her company credit card declined at a client lunch, the embarrassment acute as she fumbled for her personal card while her clients exchanged uncomfortable glances. Her call to accounting met with confusion about irregularities in her expense reports that needed investigation, the seeds of doubt about her integrity planted in a dozen minds before she even understood she was under attack. These were levels 1 and 2 of Marcus's 15-phase revenge, small disruptions designed to create stress and confusion, to make Rebecca and Daniel feel slightly off balance before the real devastation began, the way a predator wounds prey before the killing strike. Level 3 came that afternoon when Daniel finally accessed his office, only to find his computer locked and a message requiring him to report to Human Resources immediately, where he was informed that a routine audit had discovered discrepancies in his project reports, specifically claiming credit for work actually completed by his team, a pattern suggesting either incompetence or fraud, the HR director's tone professionally neutral but implying serious consequences. Rebecca received a similar summons to her manager's office, where she was questioned about vendor relationships that appeared suspicious, payments to companies that couldn't be verified, and expense reports that didn't match her calendar or documented activities. Her protests of innocence met with cold professionalism and the announcement of a formal investigation. Neither Rebecca nor Daniel connected these events to Marcus because they had already dismissed him as irrelevant, a crippled ex-husband with no power or resources, their arrogance blinding them to the possibility that the man they had betrayed and abandoned might be the architect of their unraveling. Marcus's father had been destroyed by similar arrogance, believing his business partner wouldn't discover the embezzlement, not knowing his partner had been documenting everything for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, a lesson Marcus had absorbed about patience and preparation that now guided his campaign of destruction. Level 4 activated that evening when Rebecca and Daniel returned to their luxury apartment to find an eviction notice taped to their door, citing non-payment of rent despite Rebecca's insistence that she had set up automatic payments, the building manager apologetically explaining that the payments had been rejected and they had 7 days to resolve the issue or vacate, the stress already showing in Rebecca's face as she called her bank to discover her account had been frozen due to suspected fraud. Daniel's accounts faced similar problems, mysterious holds and investigations that would take weeks to resolve, their credit cards maxed out or canceled, their financial lives suddenly in chaos while bills piled up, and their new marriage began under crushing pressure. This was the genius of Marcus's approach, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously, using his wealth and connections to create problems that seem bureaucratic and random rather than coordinated, overwhelming Rebecca and Daniel with crises that consumed their time and energy while the deeper strikes prepared. Daniel's uncle had been destroyed this way by the wife who left him. She had systematically poisoned his professional relationships over 6 months before filing for divorce, leaving him isolated and vulnerable, teaching young Daniel that revenge was best served through accumulated pressure rather than single dramatic gestures, a lesson he never thought would be turned against him. Level 5 struck during an emergency company meeting where the CEO announced a major restructuring due to market conditions. With several executive positions being eliminated or reassigned, Daniel's role specifically mentioned as redundant, and his responsibilities being absorbed by other departments, the humiliation public and complete as colleagues who had envied his rapid rise now watched his fall with barely concealed satisfaction. Rebecca faced similar professional devastation when her entire department was reorganized under new leadership. Her title changed to reflect reduced responsibilities, her salary cut by 30%, and her authority stripped away in what was described as necessary efficiency measures, but felt like targeted punishment. Neither knew that Marcus had ordered these changes specifically to destroy their professional standing, to reduce their income while their expenses remained high, to create financial pressure that would fracture their new marriage while also positioning them for greater falls to come. Marcus's second cousin had experienced similar corporate assassination when she divorced her husband to marry her supervisor, only to discover her ex-husband's family controlled the parent company and systematically destroyed both her career and her lovers, leaving them unemployed and blacklisted. Marcus remembering that story from a family reunion and filing it away as a useful template for revenge. Level 6 arrived in the form of subpoenas for both Rebecca and Daniel, requiring them to testify in a fraud investigation involving Apex Global Industries, the documents implying they were persons of interest in a scheme involving embezzlement, falsified reports, and securities fraud, each charge carrying potential prison time and mandatory minimums that suddenly made their professional problems seem minor compared to criminal exposure. Rebecca's embezzlement of company funds had been carefully documented by Marcus's forensic accountants. Every fraudulent expense report preserved, every fake vendor payment traced, every piece of evidence organized into a prosecution package that sat ready for the moment Marcus chose to deploy it. Daniel's theft of proprietary information from previous employers had been similarly compiled, Marcus's investigators discovering that Daniel had sold trade secrets to competitors and used stolen intellectual property to advance his career, crimes that previous companies had settled quietly rather than prosecute, but that Marcus was prepared to pursue with unlimited resources and zero mercy. This revelation that they faced potential prison time cracked their united front. Rebecca blaming Daniel for not being careful enough, Daniel accusing Rebecca of dragging him down with her crimes, the stress of investigation turning them against each other as Marcus had predicted, his psychologist consultant having explained that betrayers always eventually betray each other when pressure mounts. Level 7 came through the civil courts where Marcus filed a lawsuit against both Rebecca and Daniel for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and alienation of affection. The damages sought totaling $50 million, an amount that seemed absurd given Marcus's apparent financial situation, but that came with detailed documentation of their affair, the children's true paternity, and Rebecca's embezzlement, every dirty secret now part of public court records that journalists and gossip sites quickly discovered and published. The media attention was swift and brutal, with headlines like "Executive Couple Sued by Disabled Ex-Husband in Paternity Fraud Case" and "Corporate Love Triangle Ends in $50 Million Lawsuit." Rebecca's social media flooded with hateful comments, her family members calling to express shock and disappointment, her mother sobbing on the phone about how Rebecca had become just like her father, the betrayer she had always hated. Daniel faced similar exposure, his professional reputation destroyed as colleagues, and industry contacts distanced themselves from someone associated with fraud and scandal. Job opportunities evaporating, his LinkedIn profile flooded with messages from people he had wronged throughout his career, now taking their opportunity for public revenge. Marcus watched it all from his wheelchair, monitoring news coverage and social media with satisfaction. This public humiliation being level 7, the destruction of their reputations and social standing, but still not the deepest cuts in his revenge plan. Level 8 involved the children, with Marcus filing for a declaration that he was not the legal father of Jason and Tyler, presenting DNA evidence that proved neither child was his biological son, requesting removal of his name from their birth certificates, termination of all parental rights and responsibilities, and a demand that Daniel be legally recognized as their father with full financial obligations. The court filing was cold and legal, but the emotional impact was devastating, with 7-year-old Jason asking his mother why Daddy Marcus doesn't want us anymore, and 5-year-old Tyler crying inconsolably when told he couldn't visit the man he thought was his father. Rebecca forced to explain to confused children that the man who had raised them wasn't their real father, because she had lied for their entire lives. Daniel suddenly faced child support obligations for 2 children, adding financial burden to his already collapsing finances. His excitement at being a father completely overshadowed by the crushing expenses and legal responsibilities he hadn't anticipated. His new marriage to Rebecca, already strained by money problems, now further stressed by children he had secretly fathered but never planned to publicly raise. Marcus felt a twist of pain at severing ties with the boys he had loved as sons, but his therapist had helped him understand that continuing the relationship would only prolong his healing and enable Rebecca's continued manipulation through the children. That clean separation was necessary for his recovery and their eventual understanding of the truth, harsh but required. The 9th level of Marcus's revenge manifested when Daniel's past began to surface in ways that even he had forgotten were possible. With 3 different women coming forward with paternity suits, each claiming Daniel had fathered children during previous relationships and abandoned them. The timing of these suits suspiciously coordinated but legally sound, forcing Daniel to submit to DNA tests, while Rebecca watched in horror as her new husband's history of serial betrayal became undeniable. Marcus had funded these women's legal cases through an intermediary, knowing that exposing Daniel's pattern of abandoning his biological children would destroy whatever sympathy he might have garnered and position him as precisely the monster he actually was, unable to claim victimhood when his own victims stepped forward with evidence and testimony. 2 of the paternity suits came back positive, confirming Daniel had fathered children during his first marriage and during an engagement he had broken off, leaving him financially responsible for 5 children total, his income already reduced and now facing child support payments that would consume 70% of his remaining salary, the financial noose tightening exactly as Marcus had designed. Rebecca's mother had been one of 5 children her father had scattered across 3 states with different women, none receiving adequate support, all growing up in poverty while he lived comfortably. A pattern Rebecca had judged harshly until she realized she had married someone with an identical history, her self-righteous anger at her father now reflected back at her through Daniel's crimes. Level 10 struck through the IRS, with both Rebecca and Daniel receiving audit notices covering the past 7 years of tax returns, the investigation revealing unreported income, fraudulent deductions, and tax evasion schemes that Marcus's forensic accountants had carefully documented, the tax liability and penalties totaling nearly $300,000 that neither could pay, bankruptcy looming as a realistic possibility. Marcus had paid particular attention to their taxes because his mother's second husband had been destroyed by IRS prosecution after kidnapping Marcus, the government's power to investigate and punish making them perfect instruments of revenge, impersonal and thorough, in ways that couldn't be blamed on Marcus directly. Rebecca discovered that her previous embezzlement of company funds hadn't been reported as income, creating additional tax liability, while Daniel's sale of stolen trade secrets had generated unreported cash payments that now appeared as prosecutable tax fraud, each revelation adding years to potential prison sentences and hundreds of thousands in liability they couldn't afford. The stress fractured their marriage further, with arguments escalating to screaming matches about whose fault their destruction was. Rebecca blaming Daniel for not covering his tracks better, Daniel accusing Rebecca of being a trashy thief who had dragged him into her crimes, neither accepting responsibility for their own choices, both still blind to Marcus's orchestration of their complete destruction. Level 11 came through strategic revelation to Rebecca's employer's board of directors, with Marcus's attorneys presenting evidence of her embezzlement, along with proof that she had been conducting an affair with a senior executive in company offices, using company resources, and creating liability exposure for sexual harassment and hostile work environment claims. The board voting unanimously to terminate both Rebecca and Daniel for cause, eliminating any severance packages and destroying their remaining employment prospects. Rebecca's termination was particularly humiliating because it happened during a department meeting where security escorted her out while colleagues watched, her protests ignored, her professional death public and shameful, exactly the kind of humiliation she had always feared, but thought herself too smart to experience. Daniel's termination followed the same pattern. Security waiting at his desk when he arrived, his personal items already boxed, his access revoked. The walk of shame through the office he had once commanded, now witnessed by people who had resented his arrogance and enjoyed his fall. Several former subordinates filming his exit for social media, where it quickly went viral with cruel commentary. Neither Rebecca nor Daniel yet understood that Apex Global Industries was owned by Marcus, that their entire professional rise had been facilitated by the man they betrayed, that their humiliating falls had been orchestrated by the same source, the full irony still hidden but approaching revelation. Level 12 involved their families, with Marcus's investigators providing evidence to Rebecca's siblings about money she had stolen from their mother's estate during probate, using her position as executor to embezzle nearly $60,000 and presenting evidence to Daniel's ex-wife about hidden assets he had concealed during their divorce, leading to both civil suits and criminal complaints that further drained their resources and destroyed their remaining family relationships. Rebecca's sister Jennifer, who had stood as maid of honor at the wedding, filed a police report after learning Rebecca had forged her signature on loan applications, stealing her identity to secure credit that Rebecca had defaulted on, ruining Jennifer's credit score, and creating legal liability. Their already strained relationship now completely destroyed as Jennifer publicly denounced Rebecca as a sociopathic thief. Daniel's brother discovered that Daniel had stolen $50,000 from their father's medical fund before his death, money intended for cancer treatment instead used by Daniel to fund his affair with Rebecca, the betrayal so profound that the brother filed assault charges after physically attacking Daniel at a family gathering, the incident recorded by multiple witnesses and used as further evidence of Daniel's character in ongoing legal proceedings. Marcus understood family destruction because his own mother's family had fractured completely after her father's affair with his sister-in-law became public, creating rifts that never healed across 3 generations. The power of family betrayal to create permanent damage being something Marcus wielded with precision against his enemies. Level 13 centered on their housing situation, with the eviction from their luxury apartment finalized and Rebecca and Daniel forced to move into a cheap motel. While trying to find affordable housing, their credit destroyed by the mounting legal judgments and tax liens, landlords rejecting their applications repeatedly, the physical deterioration of their living situation mirroring their complete social and financial collapse. The motel was in a high-crime area because it was all they could afford, with Rebecca terrified every night, unable to sleep, her health declining from stress as she developed an ulcer and severe anxiety, her appearance changing dramatically as she aged years and months. The beautiful woman who had attracted Marcus now gaunt and haunted, her betrayal written on her face. Daniel took a job driving for a rideshare service to generate income, his pride destroyed as former colleagues sometimes recognized him, his humiliation complete when his ex-boss requested a ride and spent 20 minutes mocking Daniel's fall. Tipping $1 with a note that read, "Karma," the recording of which Marcus's team ensured went viral on social media. This physical and visible decline was important to Marcus because his father's mistress had lived lavishly on embezzled money for years before the truth came out. never facing appropriate consequences, teaching young Marcus that justice required visible suffering, that wrongdoers needed to experience tangible hardship commensurate with the pain they inflicted. Level 14 struck at their psychology and hope, with Marcus's attorneys filing motions to hold both Rebecca and Daniel in contempt of court for failure to comply with discovery requests, produce documents, and pay court-ordered costs, each contempt citation carrying potential jail time and additional fines, the legal system itself becoming a cage that slowly closed around them. Rebecca suffered a mental breakdown during a particularly brutal deposition where Marcus's attorneys systematically destroyed her attempts to justify her actions, confronting her with evidence of every lie, every theft, every betrayal, until Rebecca was sobbing and incoherent, the video recording preserved for potential trial use, but also for Marcus's personal satisfaction in watching the woman who had destroyed him finally face consequences. Daniel attempted suicide by overdose in their motel room, surviving only because a maid found him and called paramedics, the incident creating a psychiatric hold and adding mental health issues to his legal problems, his survival bitter rather than relieved. Waking up to the same nightmare, but now with medical bills he couldn't pay and a psychiatric record that further damaged his remaining credibility. Marcus felt a flicker of something almost like pity when informed of Daniel's suicide attempt, but his therapist reminded him that Daniel had shown no mercy when seducing Marcus's wife, no conscience when raising Marcus's supposed children while knowing they were his, and no remorse when abandoning Marcus after the accident, that some betrayals were so profound they deserved no quarter, that extending mercy to the merciless was enabling evil rather than demonstrating virtue. The final courtroom battle came 18 months after Rebecca and Daniel's courthouse wedding, with all of Marcus's lawsuits consolidated into one massive trial that would determine financial damages, custody issues, and criminal referrals. The courtroom packed with media, former colleagues, and curious observers drawn by the spectacular nature of the case and its viral social media presence. Rebecca and Daniel sat at the defense table looking broken and defeated, their cheap suits hanging loose on frames that had lost significant weight, their faces aged beyond their years, their court-appointed attorneys struggling against Marcus's elite legal team of 15 attorneys, led by the most expensive trial lawyer in the state. The visual disparity between the two sides telling the story before any evidence was presented. Marcus sat in his wheelchair behind the prosecution table, his appearance deliberately modest, his disability visible and sympathetic, his eyes cold and determined as he watched the people who had betrayed him face justice. This moment, the culmination of 18 months of planning, hundreds of thousands of dollars in investigation and legal fees, and a commitment to revenge that had consumed his life, but delivered exactly what he promised himself the day he discovered their betrayal. The trial's first week focused on the affair and paternity fraud, with Marcus's attorneys presenting text messages, hotel receipts, and testimony from private investigators who had documented Rebecca and Daniel's relationship in excruciating detail, including photographs of them together while Marcus was in physical therapy, fighting to walk again. The jury's faces reflecting disgust as the scope of the betrayal became clear. The DNA evidence proving Jason and Tyler weren't Marcus's biological children was presented with clinical precision. The expert witness explaining in simple terms that there was zero possibility Marcus had fathered either boy, that Rebecca had either been astonishingly ignorant of basic biology or had deliberately deceived Marcus for years, the implication clear and damning. Rebecca took the stand in her own defense and immediately collapsed under cross-examination, her attempts to justify the affair falling apart when confronted with evidence of planning and premeditation. Her claim that she fell in love, destroyed by text messages where she called both Marcus and Daniel crude names while discussing how to maximize her financial extraction from the situation. Her credibility shredded so thoroughly that even her own attorney looked disgusted. Daniel refused to testify after watching Rebecca's destruction, invoking his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. But his silence read as guilt to the jury, and Marcus's attorneys made sure to emphasize how someone innocent would be eager to defend themselves, while someone guilty would hide behind legal technicalities. The second week detailed the financial crimes, with forensic accountants explaining Rebecca's embezzlement scheme with charts and documents that showed systematic theft over 3 years. $200,000 stolen through fake vendors and falsified expenses, the money used to fund luxury vacations with Daniel, designer clothes, and the engagement ring Daniel had given her, every dollar traced and proven beyond doubt. Daniel's theft of proprietary information was similarly documented, with testimony from former employers about trade secrets he had stolen, evidence of payments from competitors for that information, and proof that his career advancement had been built on fraud rather than merit. His professional reputation destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. The tax fraud evidence was devastating, showing years of unreported income and fraudulent deductions, the IRS agent testifying that criminal referral was absolutely warranted. The charges carrying minimum sentences of 5 years in federal prison for each defendant. The reality of incarceration suddenly concrete and terrifying. Rebecca's attorney attempted to argue that Marcus had orchestrated their downfall vindictively, that he had used his wealth and power to destroy them unfairly, but the strategy backfired when Marcus's attorneys revealed the full extent of his ownership of Apex Global Industries, proving that every professional advantage Rebecca and Daniel had enjoyed was because of Marcus's generosity, that their entire relationship had been built in offices Marcus owned, with money Marcus provided, celebrating success Marcus created, the irony devastating to their defense and shocking to the jury. The revelation that Marcus was actually the secret billionaire owner of Apex Global Industries transformed the entire trial, with media coverage exploding as journalists realized the disabled man in the wheelchair was actually a Fortune 500 CEO worth over $2 billion, that Rebecca had divorced one of the wealthiest men in America to marry his employee, that Daniel had betrayed the man who signed his paychecks, and that both had been so blind with arrogance they never investigated who actually controlled the company where they worked. Marcus's testimony was powerful and controlled, explaining how he had built his fortune in secret to protect himself and his family, how he had valued loyalty and trust above all else, how he had promoted Daniel because he believed in friendship and rewarded Rebecca's career because he wanted to support his wife, and how their betrayal had destroyed his faith in human goodness while teaching him that some people were simply predators in human form who couldn't be reformed, only stopped. The jury watched Marcus struggle to shift positions in his wheelchair, saw the visible evidence of his disability caused by the accident that Rebecca had used as an excuse to abandon him, listened to his quiet dignity in discovering that his children weren't his own, and understood viscerally that this wasn't a case of wealthy vindictiveness, but justified response to profound betrayal, that what Marcus had done wasn't revenge but consequence, that Rebecca and Daniel had authored their own destruction through choices that revealed character rather than circumstances. The 15th and final level of Marcus's revenge came not through the trial itself, but through its aftermath, when the jury returned verdicts that exceeded even Marcus's expectations, awarding him $47 million in damages for fraud, emotional distress, and theft, finding both Rebecca and Daniel jointly and severally liable, the judgment collectible from any assets they might ever acquire for the rest of their lives, ensuring permanent financial devastation. The criminal referrals were accepted by both state and federal prosecutors, with Rebecca and Daniel each facing multiple felony charges, carrying aggregate sentences of up to 30 years in prison, plea bargains offered but at costs that still meant significant incarceration, their lives effectively over in any meaningful sense. Marcus arranged for the children, Jason and Tyler, to be placed with Daniel's mother while Daniel faced prison, ensuring they would be cared for but maintaining his boundary of no longer being their father. His obligation ended by their mother's betrayal, his love poisoned beyond recovery, but his decency intact enough to ensure they weren't abandoned completely. More mercy than their parents deserved, but necessary for his own sense of morality. The media coverage of the verdict was overwhelming, with Marcus's story becoming national news, book and movie offers flooding in, speaking invitations from business schools and victims' rights organizations. His name synonymous with justified revenge, and the idea that betrayal ultimately destroys the betrayer. His message clear that actions have consequences and that sometimes the disabled person in the wheelchair is actually the most powerful person in the room. Rebecca was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for embezzlement and tax fraud. Her appeals exhausted, her entry into the prison system captured by photographers who had once covered her as a rising corporate star. The contrast between her previous life and her orange jumpsuit complete and final, her beauty destroyed by stress and her spirit broken by consequences she had never imagined possible. Daniel received 12 years for his more extensive criminal history, including multiple counts of fraud, theft of trade secrets, and tax evasion across several jurisdictions. His incarceration in a medium security facility, where his former arrogance made him a target, stories of his abuse by other inmates filtering back to Marcus through investigators who maintained surveillance, not from revenge but from thoroughness, ensuring the destruction was complete. The motel where they had lived in their final months of freedom became something of a landmark, featured in documentary episodes about the case. Their room preserved as a before and after monument to how quickly privilege can become punishment when built on betrayal rather than earned through integrity. Marcus occasionally driving past in his custom wheelchair-accessible vehicle, not from vindictiveness, but from a need to remind himself that justice, though delayed, can be absolute. Marcus's physical therapy eventually restored enough function that he could walk short distances with leg braces and canes, his determination to recover fueled by refusing to let Rebecca and Daniel's betrayal define the rest of his life. His success in regaining mobility feeling like final victory over the accident that had started everything. He sold his stake in Apex Global Industries for $3 billion, donating half to charities supporting disabled individuals and victims of domestic abuse, using his story to advocate for paternity testing and prenatal DNA analysis. His message that trust should be verified resonating with audiences tired of being told that suspicion was insecurity rather than wisdom. Marcus never remarried, his capacity for trust too damaged to risk loving someone again, but he found peace in his work, his wealth, and the knowledge that he had faced betrayal and responded not with weakness, but with systematic justice, that he had been kind until kindness was betrayed, and then he had been ruthless until betrayal was destroyed, the balance feeling right even if the cost had been profound. He kept one photograph from his previous life, a picture of himself holding newborn Jason, the joy on his face real even though the relationship was based on lies, reminding himself that his love had been genuine even when others' betrayal was calculated, that he had nothing to apologize for or regret because he had lived with integrity while they had lived with deception, and in the end, integrity had proven stronger than deception. Love more powerful than betrayal when wielded by someone who understood that kindness without boundaries was weakness. But kindness with consequences was justice.